And welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Jonny Craddock.
And today we will be covering Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken, directed by Steve Miner from 1991. Girl jumping horses. So obviously that's got a strong emotional pull for us, but we'll talk about that. But before we do that, like we do every time, just to recap our last episode on our string of guests, we had Dallin, the film fanatic, on. And again, you were in the process of moving cross country. So you had everything packed up and you weren't actually able to record with us, and that's completely fine. You're doing better now, though. You've made the move to Texas, right?
We made it. We're in Texas. On that night, though, I was actually in Ohio. So, and I didn't have my stuff with me. I couldn't set anything up. So it was like, sorry, guys, gotta skip this one.
Okay. Well, and we had a good conversation. It's, Dallin, I think I mentioned to you, he's 18, 19. So, usually when you run into somebody of that age, it's kind of frustrating because they only have certain things in their mind, and it's not about film history. It's not about cultivating kind of an idea of where, how films came to be and having that kind of attitude about. Do you know what I mean about the age bracket?
Yeah.
So it was fascinating talking with him because his mind, like, again, I love that he was able to teach me things, like just recapping Secondhand Lions, something that we talked about. And again, it's a movie that it struck more of a chord with me as I was talking to him about it, because we came to one of the things that realizations we came to is that even though Haley Joel Osment isn't the best of actors, especially hitting that awkward teen age, the fact that they shot the movie in sequence, it gives you and he went through puberty at the time they were shooting it. So by the end, there's a difference between how Osmond is at the beginning of the movie versus how he is at the end. So I think they were able to capture him growing up on screen and getting that deep voice and there's a difference between him sitting on the porch with his knees, his arms wrapped around his knees, and at the end when he's got the suit jacket on and he's chatting with Michael Caine and Robert Duvall, his uncles, and he's telling them, less meat, more vegetables, and he's just, he's taking charge, and there was a definite change there. And we also talked about how the stories that they spin, because I didn't particularly enjoy the fantasy sequences as much as the sequences like when Robert Duvall grabs the young tough by the throat and says, I've been through this many wars, I've killed this many people, I've loved one woman. I enjoyed that stuff more than I enjoyed the fantasy sequences, because McCandless is more of a novice director, whereas Rob Reiner had a few movies under his belt before he did the fantasy sequences for Princess Bride. There's a little more oomph and style to those ones in Bride, as opposed to this, where the fantasy sequences were a little amateurish. They didn't have that wowza appeal to them. But what Dallin helped me realize, and we kind of came to a meeting of the minds, is that it's not about how the story's being told, it's about what's being told. It's about the message that's coming across in what somebody's telling you and what you're supposed to learn from the stories that they tell, as opposed to how they tell it or how flowery they make it. So it was a fascinating discussion, especially with somebody, like I said, half my age or half our age, being able to have that kind of enriching conversation, enriching in-depth conversation. And you don't run into that kind of thing a lot.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so that was fun. But obviously you don't have your movies behind you, and you're not on. You said you don't have your microphone like you have because you're not quite set up, right?
Yeah. Well, they are behind me. They're just too far apart.
Right. Okay. And again, I can see your face bright and clear, and I think that's just because you're closer.
Yeah.
You're not as far away. That has to be it, right? Okay.
One time zone, so.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we want to talk about Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken, but before we do that, let's go ahead and have a look at the trailer.
Sounds good.
What's your secret wish? What did you always want to be?
In every girl's life, there are dreams of adventure, of romance, of greatness. But Sonora had a special dream. Who are you?
Your new diving girl.
No, you're not. A diving girl has to be strong. A diving girl has to be brave, fearless, a showman.
But I can do it, because I can do anything.
Good. You can get out of here.
I'm not going to leave until you give me a job.
Go on, get.
Have a good trip.
She was ready to face the challenge, but not alone.
There's the tower.
The horses haven't yet hurt?
Nope. Just the riders. Yeah, you really think you can do it, huh?
Sure. If Dr. Carver ever gives me a chance.
You mount that horse while he's moving. I'll let you train to be a diving girl.
Sonora would learn that a dream worth having
I can do it. I know I can.
is worth fighting for.
That girl.
We did it, boy.
All right, all right.
He's doing good, though.
But what she never expected
It's for you.
was to find someone who would share her dream.
Sonora, I love you.
Just need a little more time.
No, it's gotta stop. I don't want you hurt.
I have to do this.
Let's do it just like we practiced, right?
What if I can't do it?
You'll do it. When dreams take flight, wild hearts can't be broken.
Okay, Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken, 1991, directed by Steve Miner, starring Gabrielle Anwar, Cliff Robertson. Again, Johnny, I wanted to welcome our next guest, our next Twitter friend, Lauren Kay. She's, how do you describe yourself? Cinephile, wife, dog mom, Stallone enthusiast?
Yes, all of those things. My Twitter and Instagrams are at That Movie Is Fine, because a lot of movies that people love, I think are just fine.
Well, that was the question. Like maybe I wanted to lead with. It's well, explain. Like we said, we were talking a little bit before, but explain yourself, Missy. Why did you decide to come on our little podcast? So what defines you?
Well, I think it was because I started following you on Twitter somehow, and you had put out the call a couple months ago asking like who wants to be on my podcast, and I was like, can't hurt. So I reached out to you, but by day and by night, I'm a film and events programmer for the 3 Alamo Drafthouse Cinema locations here in Phoenix, Arizona.
Wow.
I've been with Alamo Drafthouse for about 5 years. I think it'll be 6 in September. I don't know. But yeah, so I do all of their programming and events, and I'm excited to be busy again.
Yeah. So how Alamo Drafthouse? They're pretty famous. How long have they been shut down for? Like from the beginning of the pandemic, or?
So all of us, whether we were, like Arizona, Texas, we all shut down like the week of St. Patrick's Day, like most places did, and there were all those stay-at-home orders. I was furloughed, and then I was like no job. But then we were going to reopen again, and we are a franchise location, not corporate. So I was heavily needed to help like program and get back into the community and things like that. And we had some of our like social media people had left and gone back to Texas. So that also helped open up a job for me as well to kind of fill in on social media, things like that. So we reopened over Labor Day, along with like 9 or 10 other Alamos. So for a while, there's really only been a dozen-ish or so that have been open since Labor Day. And then now they're opening another dozen between now and the end of June, I think it is. So it's been a rough go, especially when there really were not movies to show. We had the smaller ones. We showed 40-Year-Old Version. We showed Cajillionaire. But a lot of it was just, please come see the Goonies in a theater.
Yeah.
A lot of the movies you talk about on your podcast are what we showed.
Because is that all you had access to? Obviously no new movies were coming right to theaters. So you just had to show like revivals and old prints.
Yes. I mean, honestly, there were like those smaller indie ones. IFC Films has been, consistently releasing like small art house fare. And like I said, there was Cajillionaire, and there were others that had just come off of like the festival circuit, some Netflix titles that we were able to show. But it was a really interesting a really interesting time where it was like, hey, we're bringing Batman 89 back, and you know, here are, you know, COVID protocols, like here's what we're doing to help you feel safe, and we're working off of a very limited menu, and we're only open, you know, 2 or 3 rounds a day, and things like that. But I'm so grateful to my team. I'm so grateful that they, you know, kind of made a place for me, and then now I'm able to be back. I still do social media, but I'm back in my role of like working with like doing community events and doing like Skype Q&As and things like that. And it's really exciting again.
Wow. So what you were doing before, you're just picking up again, doing the same thing, right? Is that what I'm?
But by degrees. It's picking up now, thankfully, especially with like vaccinations, you know, open to all, which happened out here in Arizona, I think in April. So it's we have seen a drastic increase. Godzilla versus Kong. Even like I know, you know, there are mixed feelings, you know, on Warner Brothers and the decisions they've made and what Universal decisions made during the pandemic and things, but Mortal Kombat was huge for us. You know, so there is the demand. Godzilla versus Kong is really a big screen experience. Like you might go home and watch it on HBO when you're done. Of course, it's gone right now because it's the 30-day, you know. But it was beautiful. I saw it for my birthday. It was beautiful on screen and loud, and like people do want that. And it's very, very exciting that we're getting movies again.
Yeah. Just briefly, Godzilla versus Kong. My sons, all of a sudden, we talked on before on the podcast. Like, it's hard to get my kids to watch movies, even though that's my life, and I was studying to be a movie critic. It's like it's hard to tear them away from YouTube. But we were sitting around at the dinner table, and Godzilla versus Kong, I think it was coming out that weekend, and I mentioned it, and all my boys were like, I want to go see that. So I was like, all right, let's go see Godzilla. So we went and saw that on a big screen, and you're right. It was nice to be able to go back there and see kind of it's dumb. Obviously, it's a big dumb monster movie, but you know, what better way to ring back, you know, coming to theaters and watching something that's a big spectacle, right? So yeah, that completely makes sense. So I mean, let me ask you. I'm really interested, obviously, as being a programmer for that. Explain what you do. You explained it briefly, but what is it that your job entails?
We'll just say, like, all things being equal, like pre-pandemic, right? We'll just say, like, in a perfect world, here's what I was doing and here's what I'll be doing again.
Okay.
We have titles that every Alamo will play every month. I'm not revealing trade secrets, but it's kind of obvious. We'll all play, you know, kind of the same movies, right? Like whether you go to an Alamo in Austin or an Alamo out here, we're going to have Jurassic Park that month, or this month we have Casino, right? But then Alamo really prides itself on getting to be your neighborhood theater, being a part of the community, right? Instead of this big conglomerate like some other national and international movie theater chains. They have someone like me in every market to do outreach with all the different like community groups and really get to be involved in like school groups or the NAACP groups and things that are out there. So I, every month for ultimately our 3 locations total, I was doing all 3, still am. I would create a calendar that was about 6 to 8 weeks out. And I would stagger the programming because you don't necessarily want to have Casino on the same night at every single location because you'll kind of split your audience. So like one week we might do Casino at our Tempe location. Then the next week we'll program Casino. But we partnered with Arizona State University out here in their film department. And once a month we were doing film school, and a film professor would come. He would do like an intro lecture. We'd all watch the movie. And then at the end, we all would have like a class discussion, so to speak, about the movie. We did Citizen Kane, we did Dazed and Confused, we did just ran the gamut on the waterfront. So things like that we've done. I'll work with, there's a local childhood advocate educator out here who does like documentaries about cyberbullying, things like that. So we'll do events with her. She'll have a panel of mental health experts and maybe like a child that overcame addiction or something like that. And that'll be in our more like suburban Alamos. So it's really just getting to be a part of the community. We're rooted here. We hire here. My franchise owner moved from Texas out here. So like he's in Arizona now. So we say that we're a local company out here, and each Alamo just really gets to know where they are and we program accordingly. Like I spent a couple years building the horror scene at one of our locations. And now like we are a go-to place for like weekly horror movies or our October horror marathon, things like that. So it's really exciting to see all of that hard work pay off. But then I would order it, like we would do movie parties, which you would have certain props that would come with the movie kind of thing, whether you would wear them or you would like use them during the movie or things like that. So it was also like inventory control. It was, you know, advertising. So it was many hats.
Yeah, well, that sounds exciting. And you know, you staked a claim, it sounds like.
So I love it. My entire career, I didn't have a film. Well, I have a film background, but I didn't study it. I just sort of fell into this job. But it's like all my decade plus of working has come to this. It's the best, most favoritist job, funnest job I've ever had. It makes me use words that don't exist. I love it so much.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Wow. Well, we love that. We love that about you. So, you know, wow, that's, like I said, you've really staked the claim. So with your movie background, how have you come to be? Like, how would you explain yourself? And obviously I want to ask about Sylvester Stallone, but like, how would you define yourself as like a movie watcher? I mean, what defined you? What got you interested in movies and what defines you now?
Oh my gosh.
I'm sorry if that's a loaded question.
No, it's okay. I mean, I grew up, like everyone grows up with like that's I grew up watching movies. But I was a huge musical person. So I was watching Oliver as a kid, and like I had all the Little Mermaid, like the Disney clamshells. So I was always fascinated by movies. My dad actually is responsible for introducing me to what I call the big three. He showed me Indiana Jones, Star Wars, and Back to the Future. And he also showed me Papillon and Bridge on the River Kwai. So I do have to give credit to my dad for that. My mom was she liked action movies. She had 2 older brothers. So there would be action movies in the house, but there was also a lot of like Dirty Dancing and Sound of Music. But I think I came into it in high school when I joined drama. I started doing theater in middle school and then joined drama club in high school. And that's where like Princess Bride became, you know, the thing. But I ended up getting a job at Hollywood Video when I was about 17, I think. And that, even though I took film classes in school and I was 2 credits shy of a double major in film, I always say that I got my film education at Hollywood Video. 3 free rentals a day. You know, so I would close up at midnight and go home and watch a movie. So that's really where I started catching a lot of movies that I had never heard of or hadn't seen. You know, I watched Touch of Evil for the first time when I worked at Hollywood Video. I started getting into horror. I was never a big fan because I had an overactive imagination as a kid, and things would affect me differently than they might affect someone else. But I would start to, you know, I watched like the first Nightmare on Elm Street, which I had never seen before. So I was able to catch up on a lot of films, and that's really, I think, where I fell in love with it. And then when I went off to college, it was like, well, can't make a living in film, so I'll just take a bunch of film classes. And I ended up taking more than my minor even. And like I said, was 2 credits shy of a double major.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That my experience, like I mentioned briefly, I was studying to be a film critic until I decided that film critic is more of a thankless job. But like, it was weird going to college and like studying things that I wanted to study. And like on the way to, or, you know, the movies that we would study, be like, oh, I already own that one. Like I've seen that one like multiple times. So it wasn't like hard doing homework. And, you know, on the way to work, on the way to school, I would read cover to cover, like the books that it was so weird going to college and going to school and like actually reading and enjoying the stuff that you were studying. It was just such a weird concept.
I agree. All the film students there thought I was a film student because they would see me in all of their classes, but I didn't have a desire to be a professor, and I have no interest in behind the camera. Like I don't want to direct, like none of that ever interested me. I just really wanted to like watch movies, read about movies, study movies. And that wasn't really an avenue in the early 2000s, like where I,
Yeah.
but that really cemented it. But my major was in broadcasting. So I have always been in the media world.
So that's more the angle that you go at, which is great. It's we come at it from all angles, and it's interesting that you mentioned that you were in drama in middle school and high school. That's where Jonny and I met, and that's where we kind of flourished in high school. You mentioned Princess Bride. We talk about that a lot. You mentioned Batman '89, which we did a podcast when we started doing YouTube. That was our debut episode. So it's great that and I love hearing people when they get an eclectic intro to movies. It's not just one particular type of movie that they're watching. I love that you're watching Touch of Evil. You've got Dirty Dancing as part of your rotation. It's you have to have that roundabout approach to film to appreciate it, I think.
I definitely agree. I have a lot of issues with film critics these days, and don't actually follow too many of them. I'm not a fan of kind of shaming someone for liking a movie or not being able to appreciate something I don't think any movie is terrible. And that's sort of it's very rare that I can't find any sort of redemption in a film. And I think like that's to me, like I've started doing my own reviews on social media, and I have a quality rating and I have an enjoyment rating, because there are a lot of movies that are 5 stars, but I'll never watch it again. Right. Like I think needs to be kind of a balance. And I think every movie has something good about it, to be honest. And I'll watch anything.
Right. Well, being a parent and, having work and all this stuff going around, it's hard for me to sit down and watch a movie and be irritated by it. I don't have time to not enjoy myself. So I have to find something when I sit down and watch a movie. I have to find something that I enjoy about it. Otherwise it's a waste of my time. That's just, and you talk about shaming. That's something that we definitely don't do on this podcast. We try to approach everything kind of objectively as you can. But, Jonny too, what were do you agree? Is that a viewpoint that you have too? I don't know if you've ever talked about that, the approach to watching movies.
Well, yeah, for sure. I definitely agree that it's good to be well-rounded when it comes to movies. Like Lauren, I'm kind of the same way. Like I love every genre. I like to watch all the different types of movies. I grew up watching horror, and but then again, in college and high school, I branched out and started to study more, deeply into the filmmaking side of things. And so I got into actually working in film, and so that's kind of where my knowledge comes from, is actually working behind the camera and in front as well too. But yeah, I definitely agree that it's important to be well-rounded, for sure.
Yeah. And speaking of shaming, obviously it's there's no harm in loving Sylvester Stallone. Lauren, where does that love come from? Explain your attraction to that.
So it's a very recent love. I was not in a good place last year at all. And people I would see people online watch like all these Oscar winners and all these like indie art house movies while they were trapped at home. And I tried to watch, movies that I should be watching. And I couldn't focus. Like I didn't want a depressing movie, or I didn't want like a 3-hour epic or whatever. So I just really wanted to see stuff explode. So I actually I wanted to see like people fight each other. And so I started with Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, incidentally, which ultimately led me down the canon path. Oh. So I watched a bunch of canon movies too, which I loved, like Invasion USA. So I did all the JCVD type stuff, but they all overlap with canon, a lot of them. So I was branching out and doing canon, and I was like, I really like this studio. Like I love these. This is exactly what I want. And then I came to Cobra, which I had never seen before at all. I had heard about it, but had never seen it. So that was just part of the canon thing. Like that was just like, oh, I might as well watch Cobra, because I had just watched the Electric Boogaloo documentary.
Right.
Do you guys know that? Like the history of canon films documentary.
Yeah, fascinating the way that their work ethic and how many movies they had at a time, and just the way that you talk about them we all have our way of coping during the pandemic. And yeah, sometimes you just want some dumb action entertainment that's not like going to win Oscars or, you know, get you into certain, you know, hoity-toity social circles. So yeah, that's definitely an attraction that I can understand.
So I got to, after watching the documentary, I made my way through some of the films that were on it, and I got to Cobra, and I loved it. Like, it was over, and I wish I could have gone back to watch it again. Like, I was ill prepared for how much I loved Cobra and how like charming, like how into Sylvester Stallone I was like in that movie, like, and how funny he was. I know that movie gets so much crap, but
well, like the cutting of the pizza, right? Is that something?
Yes, the cutting of the pizza, and then like, you got a major attitude problem, you know that? And he's like, little one, like, just it's so great. Like, I don't know. I loved it. And so then I ended up watching like a few more. I think I watched Over the Top because I had also never seen it, believe it or not. I programmed it a bunch actually, but I've never actually watched Over the Top. So I watched that and I loved it. And then it became, well, I haven't seen all of the Rambo movies. So I went back to First Blood and watched all the Rambo movies. And then it was, well, I haven't seen all the Rocky movies. And one thing led to another. And I became like really into Sylvester Stallone movies and made my way through almost all of his canon over the last year.
Well, I want to ask you, which movie is your favorite? Would you say Cobra is your favorite Stallone movie, or do you have another one?
It's funny you should ask that, and thank you for asking. Cobra is actually in my top 5, but I unironically love Rhinestone.
With Dolly Parton, right?
Yes, I love that movie. I've watched it quite a bit after watching it the first time, and it wasn't just like pandemic delirium. I love it. I will talk about that movie for hours. I will defend it. Rhinestone is my favorite Stallone movie.
Do you know all the lyrics to Drinkenstein?
Not necessarily, but I do know the duet. The duet that he sings in the middle with Dolly is better than the solo song that he sings at the end, even though he's got the like literal rhinestone cowboy outfit with the dripping diamonds of fringe. But the Fall in Love, I woke up in love song that he sings to Dolly.
Yeah.
Like, so good. I love that movie, you guys. I'm not sorry. I'm not at all sorry about it.
There's no reason to be sorry. So this, you know, I could sit here and wow, I could talk to you all day about Alamo Drafthouse, about the types of movies that you had growing up with. I could talk to you about Sylvester Stallone. The thing about his, you know, the other thing too that we talk about is there's nothing wrong with liking. So he fits a certain demographic, right? Like you like Sylvester Stallone for what you expect from his movies. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong either with liking the Oscar bait movies. It's just a question of getting that diet and having that cinematic diet and having a little bit of everything, so that you're not just dining on McDonald's / superhero films / horror all the time. You want that, again, that eclectic kind of flavor. So even though I could sit here and we could talk for hours about that. The way that we talk about Sylvester Stallone movies being a particular, like fitting a particular niche, it kind of suits our movie that you brought up and you wanted to talk about today. So explain why you wanted to, what's your history with Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken, and we'll talk about our history, and then we'll just dive right in and talk about what we felt about the movie.
Okay, I am so excited to hear you guys talk about this movie because I do think it's completely underrated or almost forgotten, except until now, because as we have found out, it just this week entered Disney Plus, but had not been part of it. I have been thinking a lot about my childhood. I'm going to use this term once because I know some people don't like it, but horse girl. I'm going to use that term only that one time because it does have some people do find it negative. But I would say that I was a girl who loved horses as a kid, like any girl. I did horseback riding when I was little on a pony called Coco. And I was obsessed with Lisa Frank, and the unicorn was my favorite design. I definitely did not see Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken in theaters. I know that for a fact. I honestly can't tell you, though, when I first watched it. I'm betting it was at a sleepover, because it was literally at any sleepover of this group of friends. Like if I had a sleepover, we were watching Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken. If Meredith had a sleepover, she was putting on Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken. So it was like, it was this, if you want to know what it was like being like an 8 to 12-year-old girl in the 90s, Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken is honestly a really good look into that. And rewatching it the other night, I realized that there are a lot of parts of me now that I think were rooted or formed in that movie. Things I like now that I didn't realize came from that movie. But I would say it was a sleepover staple for like 5 or 6 years. You would watch it no matter what. I had horse toys. I was friends with a girl who collected Breyer horses, if you guys know what those are.
No, explain that.
So Breyer horses it's a manufacturer, and they make these collectible horse, like probably the size of like my drinking cup, like horse dolls. But they some of them were breakable. I mean, I think they were like a hard plastic or a resin. But they actually still have Breyer shows now. I know a girl who is in her 30s and still goes to Breyer horse shows. But they were huge collectibles. I didn't have any Breyers because I wanted to be able to like play with them, and I think they were also on the higher end. But I did learn, thanks to a Google search today, that I had a couple Fashion Star fillies, which were made in the late 80s. But I had like my Barbies would ride the Fashion Star fillies, or like my friends' Breyer horses. All of us at one point in time, like again, like my core group of like 3 girlfriends, all did horseback riding at some point. I don't know. I was your stereotypical, like, had horse t-shirts and like there was a young adult series that I'm totally blanking on, that took place with like horse, like at a horse stable. Anyway, I read all those. Yeah.
Okay, so it's been a part of your life for a while. Was there a time where you stopped watching it? Obviously, you're not a 14-year-old girl anymore.
I think honestly, it was because I don't think I owned it on VHS. And once I left Hollywood Video, there was no access to it. We would occasionally put it on at Hollywood Video. You know, we would like play a movie throughout the store, and it had to be like G or PG. Yeah. So sometimes we would throw that in. But honestly, there was no access to it. It wasn't on a single streaming site. It honestly, until I reached out to you about this podcast, was a movie that I hadn't entirely thought about in 15, 20 years, to be honest. But at one point I used to know like every line of that movie. Like that movie was probably the most important film to me as a little girl.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about how you feel about it now. My history with the movie, and then we'll ask Jonny what his history is. I think this is the first time I'd seen it. I know during the 90s, that's when I really started watching movies, and I remember specifically the trailer. Like I know the trailer by heart for this movie for some reason. You know, it had, the Disney trailer, it had the same, I think his name was Mark Elliott. He did all the voiceover work for all the Disney trailers. So I remember like Rocketeer, he did this one, he did. So basically if it was a Disney live action movie, you'd hear his voice. But it was just one of those movies where it was like, yeah, I might get around to that sometime. So, and then I guess now I did, 30 years later. But I'm sorry I don't have more of a deep dive history into it other than knowing the trailer. But that's something that I want to talk about as, movies that fit a certain demographic or fit your personal taste, and why we don't get around to those. Jonny, what's been your history with this movie, if any?
Yeah, I saw this movie with my family, and I want to say I think my sisters, like Lauren, loved this movie. Like they loved it. They watched it all the time. So it was always on. I would see it, here and there, but I never really got attached to it. It was just something that was on in the background. A lot of times, walking in and out of the living room, you see my sisters watching it. But this time around watching it, I think I liked it more this time around. Like I think I saw things I didn't see back then, or I didn't notice back then because I wasn't really looking for those things. So this time around, I was being more picky, and I was looking for certain aspects and elements that I was hoping to see, and I saw a lot of that. And so I can say I enjoyed it more this time.
Okay. So obviously this is based on a true story. Lauren, we were chatting earlier and you said that you knew some of the history of the actual Sonora and the diving horses. Explain to us a little bit of the history of the movie and of the actual story, if you could.
So Sonora Webster was a real person. She was a real horse diver. She ended up writing a memoir called A Girl and Five Brave Horses. There it is. And she did not care for the film. She didn't think that it was like, okay, so I rode a horse, I became blind, and then I continued to dive horses. Like those are like the only three things that the movie, she said, had in common with her life story. But she was real. She joined after responding to an ad. She was 20 though. She wasn't presumably a teenager in the film. She wasn't like in school. She joined when she was 20 and actually went on for about 4 years or 7 years before having her accident. So it wasn't something that happened like right when she started or anything like that. She was about 27 when a horse kind of leapt sideways and she was off kilter when she landed and her eyes were open. And so she did have the retinal detachment. She went blind and then continued jumping horses for another, diving horses for another 11 years or so. But Carver, the showman,
Doc Carver, right?
Real. Yeah, Doc Carver. Thank you. He was real. He did shows with Buffalo Bill. He got the idea to dive horses when there were horses running across a bridge. I don't know if he was on it or what, but the bridge fell, and he saw that the horse had no problem like gracefully like diving in and came out unscathed. And so he had an idea for a show. And so he's really the progenitor of that. But he did die and his son did take over, and Sonora did marry the son and they did have a life together. She lived to be 99 and she died in 2003 and she learned Braille and, but yeah, so she was a real woman and a real story. And I haven't read I didn't know there was a memoir, honestly, until I was researching. So it's like $11 on Amazon. So I'm excited to find it.
So you're all over that. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Well, that's it's weird that she's not more of an inspiration. I mean, I know she had this movie made after, and it's a fascinating look into history that we don't usually think of. It's great running into these films that take like an unknown portion of history and they kind of show us what it was like. And again, the diving horses, that's not something that a lot of people are just aware of, even though it was very big back in the day. Didn't Doc Carver, didn't he work with Wild Bill Hickok?
Yes, he did. They did shows together. And there's like a reference when he talks like when his son Al talks about that jacket is so outdated, you need to whatever. And he's like, Wild Bill gave me this jacket or something. So that was a reference that like you don't catch when you're 10.
Right, right. Which again, based in fact, that's interesting. It's you talk about Sonora, I guess listening. I hope that doesn't sound insincere, but listening to the movie because she couldn't hear it, and saying that it didn't fit. But that's you have to embellish a lot of the time. Real life is not quite as dramatic. I liked, like at the end, one of the questions that I had to my wife was like how she says, "Oh, they never knew I was blind," and it was like, well, wouldn't that have got like her more attention? Wouldn't that have made them more money? And in the real history, you see that, oh yeah, people knew she was blind, and that's why they would show up to these shows. That was just an added oomph to it. What does that kind of thing bother you when they embellish real life, or?
I mean, I think it depends on the story, to be honest. I mean, to hear her say it and just sort of, she just went back. She took a year off after becoming blind. And then she said like, there was nothing better than riding horses. Like she loved it so much that it didn't take her. There wasn't like that struggle of like bloody noses and kept falling and things like that. There were instances where she would miss the horse and the horse would dive without her. There were shows where like she just didn't catch the horse in time or was too late or something. So I think I think the way they embellished it makes for a better story than just like she was almost 30 when she went blind, took a year off, and then like literally got back on the saddle, you know? But it didn't bother me in this type of instance, because I do think it was an important story to be told. And I know that for little Lauren, it was really, really inspirational. And I realize that now as an adult rewatching it. Having a young protagonist who was, for all accounts, like brunette, like there weren't a lot of like dark-haired protagonists, and she like was spunky and didn't give up and believed in herself, which I think is really, really important for young girls to see on screen. She did it on her own. She didn't need Al's help. She truly loved it. It wasn't for anyone else but herself. And I think that that's really important.
Yeah, one of the things that I did like about it is obviously, it has the Anne of Green Gables kind of attraction, the Louisa May Alcott kind of attraction that, young girls or teenage girls, they want to read these like romantic ideals of what life can be like. But I did like how, even though she falls in love with Al, that still doesn't define her as who she was. I mean, that was great that they fell in love, but it was still like she had to ride. It was, no matter what he said, like you don't define me. It's me that defines me, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do what I need to do. So I did like that a lot. So yeah, I mean, obviously there's, you have to embellish a little bit to be able to, tell a story. There, like I mentioned, there's a difference between real life where there's hardly any drama, and you need drama, you need conflict in a movie for it to actually be a movie. Otherwise, it's kind of like watching a documentary. So that's definitely something I wanted to cover. We each wanted to talk, maybe take a topic. Lauren, what topic or what did you want to discuss about the movie specifically, besides what we've already talked about?
So maybe my topic doesn't fit. I don't know if it's about the movie specifically, but it's sort of about the Disney features between like the 80s and mid 90s, like the output that Disney had that they stopped doing and will probably never do again. Okay,
so what kind of movies were you talking about? I know I mentioned The Rocketeer, or these different kind of live action things.
Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned The Rocketeer. I didn't add that to my list. I totally spaced on it. But I mean, you had The Black Hole in 1979, and then Something Wicked This Way Comes, and Return to Oz in the mid 80s, and Adventures in Babysitting in the mid 80s. And we all know like what happened to that. It's sanitized now, on its streaming. Roger Rabbit, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, was late 80s, which led into Dick Tracy, which led into the Stallone starring Oscar, and you had Nightmare Before Christmas. There were it was all of the features that Disney released and then distributed through their Buena Vista. And
Touchstone Pictures, that kind of thing.
Touchstone, Buena Vista, right. Like Touchstone Pictures, I think, was like a production company that was formed. Then Eisner formed Hollywood Pictures, which was to be more for like PG-13 and rated R. That's where Tombstone, like Hollywood Pictures produced Tombstone, but then Buena Vista, I think, distributed it. Anyway, so it's like all of those, the Touchstone, the Buena Vistas, is a really unique time in Disney history that I feel like they don't, this isn't meant to be an indictment, though they don't make those anymore. I feel like Disney has clearly veered away from that type of like adult fare, to be honest. And I just think it's really interesting that they, we have Tom and Jerry, from Warner Brothers, but I think you've talked about Roger Rabbit on this show, maybe, or it was one of the ones that I had proposed. I can't remember. But it's very adult, and Dick Tracy was very adult. But Disney was banking on that one, and they decked out like Disney World for Dick Tracy. So I think it's really interesting. Nightmare Before Christmas, they wanted nothing to do with for a very long time. I remember, again, drama kid, And growing up, like that movie was huge, when I was in middle school and high school, and you could only find a little bit of stuff at Hot Topic, right? You had like 2 t-shirts to choose from if you wanted Nightmare Before Christmas or something. The Disney store never had anything. And then that sort of changed, I think, in the 2000s when there was like a 15th anniversary or a 20th anniversary, re-release and things. But I think, man, the early 90s, mid 90s, late 80s was a really interesting time that we forget that Dick Tracy is technically a Disney movie, right? We forget that The Rocketeer is a Disney movie, but also like it doesn't necessarily seem like it, right? Like it fits with like the Phantom and all those other like pulp ones from other studios.
Yeah.
So I just think, I guess it isn't really a topic. Sorry to let you down.
No.
But I always think about that when I think about like Flight of the Navigator, or, when I was watching Oscar, like all these kind of risks, and the dark side that Disney had that would scare kids. Return to Oz was terrifying for a lot of young kids,
Yeah. Return to Oz, that's one that we did cover. It's interesting you talk about, like, with all these different offshoots. I think what they would do, like Rocketeer obviously has the Walt Disney Pictures banner. Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken has that. They would just think, well, if it's family fare, we can put Walt Disney on it. If it's a little more edgy, we need to put it under something different. Obviously Miramax, Pulp Fiction technically is a Disney movie, under all that banner and stuff like that. But, again, it's interesting with Return to Oz that they decided to put their Walt Disney Pictures banner on that, because that movie, like we talked about, is horrifying. Like it's pure nightmare fuel. So it's interesting that they decided, oh yeah, this will definitely be good family fare. This is interesting. So where do you think Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken fits in with the live action Disney era that we're talking about?
You know what? I didn't think to look up when the Disney Channel was actually launched. But it strikes me as pre-Disney Channel, because I was watching it and it was sort of hard to believe that this was like a theatrical film, right? It didn't have that feel to me. It was very small. It seemed like a very like small, like indie type of film. Yeah. It didn't seem like it cost a lot. The acting was hit or miss, right? But I think it falls just in the realm of risk taking, and I think focusing on young people as heroes, which they, Disney of course has since gone on to do, but I know you guys did Swing Kids. You guys did an episode on Swing Kids, and that's also a Disney film technically. So that has 18-year-olds as the hero, right? As and fighting Nazism and things like that. So I think, I don't know, it falls in that weird, because it was very early. It was 91.
Yeah.
So they still hadn't done Nightmare. They hadn't done Tombstone. Super Mario Brothers was still 2 years away. But that's another like risk-taking one that also kind of has a creep factor to it. I love Super Mario Brothers also. That's one that I will defend. And I know it made a resurgence recently on Twitter, but it's weird, right? And the movies they would do were weird, and they relied heavily on practical effects, a lot of them, and makeup effects. And largely that was because the computer technology wasn't there. But I think the closest we get to that now would be original shows on Disney Plus, but they're clearly still fitting a franchise mold mostly, right? There's no,
that makes sense. So that does tie in with what I kind of wanted to talk about is, I mentioned before that this was my first time watching the movie, and just cutting to the chase, I mean, I liked it. I mean, it was very earnest. It was very sincere. It was what it was. It wasn't trying to make any kind of grand statement. It's interesting, especially mentioning the Rocketeer quite a bit, that it's kind of like a girl version of the Rocketeer. It's like the same kind of high flying adventure, taking risks kind of thing, but inspiring, as Rocketeer, they hoped would inspire boys. Like Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken is an inspiration to girls in that mindset. And like you talked about growing up with the movie as a teen, it's reading the reviews, because after I watch these movies, I like to go into the reviews and see what people were picking apart or what angles they're coming at. I didn't find a lot of reviews, but I did find a lot of user reviews where it's like people talking about how they grew up with the movie and how it inspired them to, do things and take risks, and it inspired them in that way. Just at the end of the movie, I turned to my wife and said, "So who is this movie for?" I mean, I liked it, but it's not the way that it does certain things, the way that, it starts off, like we talked about with like Anne of Green Gables, it has that kind of, she's rebellious and she's, the girls are daring her to do these risks with the horse. She goes to the school, and I laughed at the part where she punches the other bully in the face. I laughed again when there's a shot of the bully covering her face, but then the teacher says she's suspended, and you just get a quick glimpse of the bully smiling because that's what she wanted. She's overplaying it. Yep. And then it comes to the part where, she goes home and Sonora, her aunt says, "I need to get rid of you," because I thought that was funny. It's like, well, she says, "I need to get you to the state, and, you've just been nothing but trouble." And I was like, well, that's a nice way of telling somebody that you don't want them around. And then she goes, "But, come help me with supper. And then tomorrow we'll kick you to the curb." That kind of thing. And it's one of those movies that hits, she finds an ad. She goes, she doesn't become a part of the troupe, but Doc hires her to be the stable hand. She eventually gets what she wants with not a lot of pushback. And it seems to be, it doesn't really fit. I don't know how to explain this. It doesn't fit like my personal, like what I would want out of a movie, but it's not made for me. I don't think I can't be hard on it because, I have to approach a movie like this as, who is it meant for, and can I enjoy it from that angle? And I think I did, even though it wasn't my kind of thing. I mean, Lauren, what do you think about that?
I think that's accurate. I think comparing it to The Rocketeer is actually really interesting when you say it's like Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken is a Rocketeer for boys. And I think that's true. It wasn't made for you. I definitely, it's not a little boy's movie, right? This was definitely made for, 8 to 12-year-old girls in the 90s.
Yeah.
And that's, but I think that's okay. Cause I don't think, there was Pollyanna, but I don't think there were movies for girls in the 90s. I feel like a lot of the action movies, they were made for boys. I don't think girls had a lot outside of the Disney princess animation. I'm sure there will be people that will chime in and be like, well, there was this movie and this movie, but like top of my head, I can't think of another movie that I watched as much as a kid, except maybe Oliver, but Nancy is not a good role model in Oliver,
Yeah.
So that there isn't, it was made for girls like me who just wanted to belong, who the word dream kept kind of being like woven in. Like she didn't have a dream of being a horse diver. She didn't even know what it was, but she had a dream of getting out and doing something that involved what she loved. The real Sonora Webster loved riding horses and would even skip school to ride horses. So I think that was like their way in, but I was from Georgia. Sonora was from Georgia. She wants a better life. She wants to get out to Atlantic City. I always wanted to live in New York City as a little girl. Like there are a lot of things about me now that I really think would not have like shaped me if I hadn't watched this movie. But it was definitely, I think, made for girls. And I do think it is important that, sure, she fell in love, but she didn't fall apart when Al left, right? She continued working hard. She refused to stop, even when Al was like, stop it, she's hurt, all that. I think it's really, really important that girls see that. And it's okay to get hurt. You just have to get back up and keep going, and that you don't need anyone else but yourself. And it's okay to follow your dreams. And if someone doesn't support you in that, too bad. You don't need that.
Yeah. And again, I don't, movies, in a way they're for everybody, but they're not. I don't think it's necessarily bad that some movies aren't made for certain people. There has to be, I don't know, Johnny, what do you think about that? Even though I enjoyed it, I still see that the appeal, it's not geared towards me, even though I was still able to pull some enjoyment out of it. What did you think about it watching it this time? You said that you noticed a few more things.
Yeah, like you both, I agree that it's not meant for boys. Because I didn't respond to this movie as a young boy. My sisters did, and so I can see why they liked it too. But when I'm thinking about it this time, I wanted to go in with a different perspective. I wanted to, give it a chance, try to find things that I would like, because I knew I probably wasn't going to like it. And still, I think the story's kind of weak, just about a girl diving off of the thing with a horse. It's just kind of weak story. Like
it doesn't break any molds. There's,
it's hard for me to latch onto that. But I was like, okay, I'm going to find something that I can enjoy about this or positive about it. And I really like the message behind it. I like the don't give up message. I like the, work hard for your dreams, that kind of thing. I really respond to that. And I noticed the camera work. I thought it was really well done. There's a lot of interesting camera work in this movie. If you're looking at it, you can see some really cool just setups, and just the camera movement was really well done. The lighting was great. A lot of cool things about it. So I was really enjoying that. And I was enjoying just the message that the movie has.
Okay. And Lauren, was that something that was important to you? That was obviously something that was important to you growing up, was it not?
It was, but I also don't know. I don't think it was a conscious thing. Like, I think just repeated viewings of the movie soaked into me somehow. And there was just, I was very outgoing as a little kid, but I did not have a lot of confidence. And I was not popular in even elementary school. Right. And I was overweight in middle school. Like I didn't have, I don't know. This movie really does mean a lot to me, even though I remember a lot of things differently. There were things that I remember as if I had just watched it 20 years ago. But then there were other things where I remember happening sooner or in a different order or something like that. But I think there are other girlfriends of mine would also agree. Like, we were gawky, we were awkward. We weren't like the pretty ones in school. And it doesn't matter like how many times your parents say you can do anything, that's not the same thing as sort of seeing yourself represented on screen. And I mean, we always say it, representation is important, but I think stories like this are very important, and I think have stuck with other women like in their 30s as well, whether they realize it or not.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've noticed, especially listening to past episodes, especially the last few we did, is Johnny's, you've mentioned the camera work a few times, like with Stand By Me, or with, what was the movie, The Witches, or with Rad, or a lot of times, like you would mention, well, the filmmaking it didn't move, like the camera wouldn't move and things like that. So it seems like that's when we texted back and forth earlier. I was like, well, that's interesting, because this is a movie that engaged you on that level where some past movies had not.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. It's interesting too, talking about the empowerment message, which I did like. Coming from this guy, Steve Miner, he'd only done, as far as I know, he'd done Friday the 13th, part 2 and 3. He directed those, which are not the most female empowering movies. If anything, they're more exploitative. He did Soul Man. I think that's the one with C. Thomas Howell, where he puts on blackface.
Yep.
Which I haven't seen that in forever, but it has to play different. Johnny, what was that? Sorry.
To play basketball, right?
Yeah, that's right. Just, oh my gosh. I'm sure that would have very different connotations today. And then he obviously, he went on and did Forever Young with Mel Gibson. He went back to his horror roots, did Halloween H2O. He did Lake Placid, directed those things. And then Johnny, you mentioned specifically the cinematography. It's Darren Okada, who also, like, looking up his filmography, he did like Phantasm 2 before this. So it's weird. And then later he did My Father the Hero for Steve Miner, I believe. He did Halloween 2, Lake Placid, Bring It On, he did. Mean Girls, he did. Stick It, he did. Baby Mama, which kind of fits more of the mold of Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken than Phantasm 2 of all things. But it's weird that is where, if you're going to start off doing Friday the 13th and all of a sudden you'd switch to a movie like this, you know what I mean? But I don't think, even though this movie is for girls, Lauren, That sounds like it's negative. I'm trying not to make it sound negative, but even though it's geared that way, it didn't push that agenda. I don't feel. Like I said, it was very earnest. It was very straightforward and sincere. It was just, this is the story we're going to tell. We're not trying to force anything on you. This is just how it happened. Is that something that you liked about it, watching it again recently?
I think so, yeah. And also another movie that popped into my mind was Billy Elliot as like a similar story that also isn't necessarily for one audience. And I mean, obviously Billy Elliot, and there are some similarities, I think, too.
Yeah.
Of that. Yeah, I cried at the end, even though I knew what was gonna happen. Like, I was tearing up in the last 5 minutes of the movie, and that was something that really surprised me. Because I totally remember how the movie ended. But I mean, you were talking about like audio and cinematography before. I still, like, if someone mentions Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken, the horse coming up the tower and the hoof beats are something that I have remembered for 25 years. Like, that has also stuck with me. But yeah, I don't know if it holds up. I don't know. I don't know if we're going to talk about that or not.
Well, what do you, Johnny, you were kind of spun. Did you want to mention anything before I ask her a new question?
I'm just thinking of things I'm going to say when you ask if there's anything else you want to talk about.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll come to that. Well, Lauren, you talked about you don't think it holds up?
I think as a film, it actually it holds up. I think the horse jumping is actually not as dated as I thought it would look. That was actually the part I was nervous about, because I honestly was really worried about the horse jumping scenes and have it affect me as an older adult now who, has animals of her own. Like, I was actually worried about it because I didn't remember how those scenes were portrayed in the film. Okay. I just think it has a very low budget feel, and I just think it's the talent is maybe where, as an adult who watches movies for a living now. But I think I shouldn't say that it doesn't hold up. That was an unfair statement. It does hold up. The cinematography does, and the horse jumping scenes do. There's clear like matte painting when they're in like Atlantic City and stuff that is a little bit like, you can tell it's dated, but it still does a really good job. I just think from a performance standpoint, you don't care about the acting when you're 8 or 10, but I don't think the acting maybe holds up. Maybe that's the only criticism that I have. And I remembered the movie different, like things happening differently.
Well, it's very of its time. It feels very 1991. I don't know if that makes any sense. You mentioned the acting. Gabrielle Anwar, I usually find her, like, Burn Notice was a show that I watched because I'm a big Bruce Campbell fan. And so I always would catch episodes of that. And she just came off in that as very supermodelish. Like, she reminded me of Posh Spice, just the kind of, I'm too good for whatever I'm a part of. Like, I'm going to give you the minimum of effort, even though maybe that was her character on the show. But watching her in this, she was very spirited at the beginning. Like, again, she had that rebellious streak. Obviously you've got Cliff Robertson, who's, a staple, and he's got this warmth to him. What was his name? The Dylan Cussman, the Clifford character, the redheaded kid, which he was in Dead Poet Society, which we've mentioned before on the podcast. It's weird. You look up the stuff when we talked Rad with Brian Scuttle, he mentioned that the twins in that movie, the other team's twins, they wrote the Conjuring movies, which kind of blew our minds. But you look at Dylan Cussman in this movie, he actually wrote the Tom Cruise Mummy movie that was out in the last few years.
What?
And so you're like, what? Like that, I guess that's where his career went. But, you talk about the acting too. What is his name? Michael Scheffling. I'm going to mess that up. Like he's fine. But I just noticed, like, especially in the end when he's trying to emote, I was like, ooh, that's rough. Like he wasn't as natural. You could tell that he was acting a little bit.
Yeah, I don't like, okay, so I knew about the Gabrielle Anwar Burn Notice thing. That blew my mind, like, when I learned about it, like when I was watching Burn Notice and someone was like, she was the girl Wild Hearts. I was like, what? But he was his name Jake? He was in 16 Candles.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. I'm not like the biggest 16 Candles fan, but I like was watching Wild Hearts and I didn't know that movie when I was 10, you know, so that wouldn't have made the connection for me. But as an adult, I was like, that guy looks so familiar. And I had to go to IMDb or Letterboxd to figure it out. But I mean, I definitely remember like as a young girl, he was very attractive, right? So like I do remember that he was like the ideal man for like, you know, young Lauren. I will say the only thing that we talk about holding, the only thing that made me cringe now was the age. She was clearly
the age difference.
Yeah. And that now, I mean, you think about 1930s, like that was not a big deal, right? In the grand scheme. But I mean, in real life, she also didn't even join until she was 20. So she was very much a woman in the eyes of the law when she joined the horse diving show. But in the movie, she's still in school.
Yeah.
And runs away. And you have to assume she's 17. She was one of the older kids but it's a little bit like as grown, like it's a little bit cringy now. So maybe that's the part that I maybe would have like made him younger or her older, like now.
Yeah, that's a weird compromise because you're trying to appeal to 14, 15-year-old girls, but you know, you also I agree with you with the cringe stuff. And again, you kind of push back against that because, you know, even though I think maybe 15, 17, if that, but at the time back in during those days, I mean, that was just a natural, it wasn't anything that we kind of turn our noses up at now. Talking about the cinematography, like you said, it's a very small movie. It's unassuming. And I'm trying not to make this again sound like an insult, but if you were to see this movie on like the Hallmark Channel today, I think it would fit that mold. Like it has that kind of the same thing that you watch when you do watch the Hallmark Channel and you do want to feel a certain thing. I think this movie would fit in there as far as being dated. So if you were to see this, that's a weird word. If you were to see this movie on screen today, I don't think it would work. But, you know, TV movies being what it is, with a lot of TV today has better quality and better filmmaking than even some of the Avengers movies. I think there's a lot more creativity to a lot of the TV than there are in movies. So I don't mean that as a negative, but as far as it dating and not holding up, I think that's kind of where my mind went. And also like we talked about, the easiness of how she gets everything she wants. And I thought it was funny, like the ending, how she jumps and then she's like, and I jumped for 11 more years and nobody knew. And we lived a happy life, and then out. And I was like, wait, what? That's your ending?
I did, even though I was crying, I did laugh. Like I did sort of chuckle at the end. I was like, oh, that was abrupt. Like I had forgotten about the voiceover, and then it's like, and scene. Credits.
Yeah, but again, still, I think that fits the mold of the Little Women, of the Anne of Green Gables. It kind of fits that mold of what they're going after, I think. So I didn't, even though I laughed, I thought, well, that's strange, but it still works for the tone that the movie is trying to set and what it's after. So I don't necessarily think of that as a negative. But yeah, I don't mean that to sound bad against it, but I guess the last thing I want to bring up before we talk about any like other loose threads is we brought on, like when we first started this podcast, Lauren, we had like a kind of, a family fan base, and we started building that. And some of the requests, we started asking for requests for movies. And one of the movies that that people requested was Labyrinth. And Jonny and I remember when we were living in the same state with each other, we talked about Labyrinth, and we looked at each other like, I don't know if I want to cover it, because both of us don't like that movie, but you want to cover some of these shows. And so we brought on Jonny's wife, who has a strong connection to Labyrinth, because that would allow us to talk about the meanings of boy cinema versus girl cinema, and why Labyrinth is more attractive to girls than Star Wars would be to girls. And so we wanted to talk about that. But that's a big reason why when you mentioned Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken, I thought, I haven't seen that. I know I always meant to see it, but I know it's a girls movie. I still want to talk about it. And I think that's important. Do you think that these girl movies or movies, and you've kind of mentioned it, but what do you think is the importance of that? And do you think we're missing that today?
I think there are a lot more options today. I was very excited though that you guys agreed to do it, because like I said, I did not think you guys had even heard of this movie, which also was why I thought it would be kind of interesting, just to sort of, with you being like two guys, like it literally is the look inside the mind of like a 12-year-old in the 90s. Like
Right.
I think a lot of people my age or women my age would agree with me on saying that. I think there are a lot more options now. And the streaming services are, quote, to blame for, I don't mean that in a bad way, it's just the only word that came to mind. There are a lot more tween friendly programming now that exists off of Disney Plus. Netflix is doing a great job with shows like that. There are adult themed shows geared toward women. Shrill comes to mind because the third season just came out. And there's, Adie Bryant, who doesn't fit your Hollywood glamour physique, right? And she's the star of a show where she is sexually active and is confident in herself and things like that. So I think there are a lot more options now, for both for women and girls, and for those who identify on the LGBTQIA spectrum. So I think it's good. I think it's good. I think people will discover Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken. I think there are going to be people like me who I'm not a parent, but people like me who are parents, showing this to like, oh my gosh, like I watched this movie when I was your age. Like, let's watch this movie together, and they're going to watch it like with their little girls. Yeah. And I think that's really important too.
Okay, perfect. So Johnny, you mentioned something just briefly. What were some of the things the loose ends that you wanted to mention?
Well, obviously, I want to talk about Jake Ryan. The scene in the swimming pool or in the lake when they go swimming, when he kisses her, and like he kisses her eyelid, and he kisses her forehead, and then he kisses her nose. Like there's a scene in a Family Guy episode where they spoof 16 Candles, and Jake throws Peter down on the floor, and Peter's like, "No, Jake, not like this." So when he kissed her nose, I whispered to my wife's like, "No, not like this." Anyway, yeah. Obviously, the acting too. I want to talk about that because I thought she was great, and I thought he was very weak, and so that didn't work for me because I thought she was believable, and I thought he wasn't.
Especially, do you agree? Do you know what I mean by when he was asked to emote and be more emotional? It didn't come off as well.
The funeral scene, and then like at the end where he's like trying to, it just didn't work.
Yeah, just trying to force it on there. Okay, so again, Lauren, it's great that you've listened to our episodes, and at the end we always come down to, is this worth a remake or worth remembering? I don't feel like I have to reiterate to you what that means. Do you think this movie is worth remembering, or would it be worth a remake? How do you feel about that? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So we all know studios are leaning into nostalgia, and Disney just did, for example, The Right Stuff. They did sort of like a reboot kind of thing. I didn't watch it, but I love the Mighty Ducks series, right? Like I'm watching that. I could see this as like a mini series. I could see they cram so much in to just 90 minutes that I could almost see this as like a 5 or 6 part mini series, as Disney sort of like has become even more female centric with a lot of their shows and a lot of their characters and the projects they're developing. So I don't see this being a movie. I really don't, because I don't know how you write it any differently. The life story doesn't necessarily seem, as exciting, right? As some of the embellishments that they took. I'll let you know when I read the memoir. But I could see this as a mini series. And Disney is still a movie that came to mind earlier that I forgot to mention was Queen of Katwe, about the chess prodigy, the African girl who's like a chess prodigy. It was a Disney movie that was sort of like this, that came out 5 or 6 years ago in theaters. And I don't think it really made much of a splash. But I think it had Lupita Nyong'o in it. But it was like a little girl growing up, you know, I think in the 80s, I don't know, in Africa, and she's this chess prodigy. Mm-hmm. And it's about like culturing that and nurturing that and like the conflicts and stuff within her culture and things. And I think like, so Disney still has that like in them. And so I would watch our Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken miniseries.
Okay. So basically what you're saying is the movie still means a lot to you, obviously.
It really does.
But if they were to redo it, that wouldn't hurt your feelings, basically is what you're saying.
No, it wouldn't. I definitely would be intrigued. I probably would have a lot of notes. Yeah. But I think there's a lot that could be improved upon. I think there's a really great story there, and it really is a great, important movie for young girls. And she's also not sexualized, which I meant to say earlier too. She wears an oversized swimsuit. Like, they don't actually then make her up to be like Marie, mm-hmm. who was covered in makeup and had like a plunging, like a little neckline, you know? Yeah. So I think, I think I'm ready.
Okay. Well, you know, talking about from my point of view, again, it's not for me specifically. It's not tailor-made for my taste. But I do think that it's important that there are movies out there that don't necessarily have to appeal to me. You need, I'm not a 14-year-old girl, and they need someone to look up to. They need movies to be inspired by. So as far as that goes, even though there's a little bit of a hallmark kind of, this could show up on TV and it would fit in perfectly, I still think this is worth remembering. They could remake it, but as far as a movie goes, I think it's important that these movies exist. And there should be more of these instead of more superhero movies. Jonny, how are you going to fall?
Yeah, well, like I said, I didn't respond to this movie when I was younger, and now really even, but I still found things that were good about it. There's some well done aspects to it. And so I think it's fine the way it is. I think it's worth remembering because I think it is what it is. It's fine. It does, it has the message that I like, and it has some really good camera work. So for those reasons, I would say it's worth remembering, even though there's things also that I don't like, but it's fine. It's a fine movie.
Okay, great. Again, Lauren, thank you for coming on and bringing this to our attention. I'm glad I finally got around to watching it. I'm glad that Jonny finally got around to watching it through a new lens instead of through his sister's lens. How can people get a hold of you? I want people to follow you more or find where you are. Where can people find you at?
Oh, thanks. I am on Twitter and Instagram at That Movie Is Fine.
Which is good. That's a good attitude to have. I like that. And then if they are in the vicinity of where you live, obviously the Alamo Drafthouse, they can show up there and watch Godzilla versus Kong.
Yes, absolutely. I do run the social media accounts. So if you do happen to be in the Phoenix area, shoot me a DM and tell me that you're coming to a theater, and I'll try and meet you or hook you up with some popcorn or something. Okay, that's great. And again, I think you've started like a list of movies on Letterboxd. Like you've got an account there where you're reviewing movies. And again, it's delightful. I guess that's the word I would use to describe tonight. I really appreciate you coming on, and it's seeing your smiling face and the energy you brought to our podcast. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Again, we've chatted for longer than an hour and a half. And I told you we'd only chat for an hour. So, that's, again, I appreciate everything that you brought to this and how you've told us how you cultivated your film tastes and the way that you look at your POV of That Movie's Fine, and you try to appreciate things, even if Sylvester Stallone is in them, we want to, especially sorry, I should have brought up my thesaurus. I apologize for that, especially if Sylvester Stallone is in it. So, Jonny, did you have any other questions for Lauren?
Have you seen Copland? Because that's my favorite. Stallone. Yes. Okay, I rewatched it as part of. Just making sure. All right.
Okay. Well, Lauren, I appreciate it. We'd love to have you back on. And again, thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay,
Yeah,
we'll
thank
talk
you.
to you soon. Okay,
Bye.
bye. Okay, so that was Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken. Again, I want to thank Lauren Kay for coming on and bringing us that energy that only she could bring to be able to talk about it. I had such a good time chatting with her. And like, you know, all the people we've chatted with, these 5 people, we had Brian, we had Kevin the Critic, we had Jeanette, we had Dallin the Film Fanatic, we had Lauren on. I'm so glad that I reached out and asked if anybody wanted to be on the podcast.
You know, it's nice knowing there are other people like us out there, you know, we're not alone.
Yeah.
So,
Wasn't that funny because I remember Jeanette, obviously we had that you know, similarity with our theater background.
yeah.
And then it was funny when Lauren mentioned that she was in drama, because it's like, oh,
Yeah.
something that we can talk about. It's like, it's nice having the, you know, the commonalities between us. So, you know, obviously the big thing that we settled on with Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken is, even though it wasn't geared towards us, I think there was still something to appreciate out of the movie. You like the filmmaking. I like the sincerity of it. It wasn't preachy. It just wasn't, you know, a staple of its time. It was a very 90s movie. I like that. So as far as our outro topic goes, why don't we talk about like our top 3 movies, maybe not our top 3, but 3 movies that were aimed at women or aimed at girls that we ended up appreciating anyway. Would that be something that would be fun to talk about, you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So I'll let you go first. If you wanted to pick a movie that it's not specifically geared towards you and say is geared more specifically towards your wife or something like that, what's a movie that you ended up enjoying despite the fact that it wasn't geared specifically towards your mindset?
All right. Well, let me premise this by saying, when I first got married, I was still working in film and I was in between movies. And so my wife had a job. And so she would wake up every day and go to work, and I would be stuck home just watching the movies that she had kind of brought into our collection. Because now that we're married, you know, our movie collection is kind of combined. So
Yeah.
I hadn't seen one of her movies. So I was like, maybe I take this opportunity to watch some of these movies I haven't seen before. And I had never seen Breakfast at Tiffany's. You know, I'd heard about it. People always talk about it, Haunted Love and everything. My wife really loves it. And so I thought this is a good opportunity to watch it. So one day when she was at work, I popped it in and watched it. And I watched it all the way through. And I can say I kind of enjoyed it. You know what I mean? Like Audrey Hepburn, I can see the appeal. She's good looking. She's got that charisma. The movie story, I don't really care too much about it. You know what I mean? I have a hard time responding to the whole movies that are only about the romantic relationships. I have a hard time with that. I want more than just it's all about this couple. You know what I mean? So it's for that reason I don't really think it's the greatest movie ever made, but I think it was still entertaining, and mainly because of Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah, there's a definite appeal there. You know, there's the whole controversy with Mickey Rooney in there playing an Asian guy and like a stereotype of that, which fits the time. And we could kind of push back against that. But, for the time, that was just something that was viewed as being funny, even though it's not really as much today. But Audrey Hepburn's got a definite built-in appeal there. So that's something that Elizabeth, my wife, showed me, and I ended up enjoying that mostly because, like you said, Audrey Hepburn. So kind of going with that, kind of an older one, like like every Little Women iteration I've enjoyed. I like the Katharine Hepburn version from 1933. I like the Winona Ryder, Claire Danes, Gillian Armstrong directed one from 1994. I especially like the Greta Gerwig one that just came out a couple years ago because
Ruth didn't like it.
Okay, well, I think why didn't she like it? What was her reasoning?
I forget why. All I know is that she didn't like it.
Well, I think the thing with me was like when I heard that they were doing Little Women, I'm like, haven't they done that like 100 times already? Like, what's the appeal of doing the same story like again and again? I just like that she was able to make it more modern and kind of spin it in a way that made it more personal. And again, she messed with the time so that she was able to, because it's told during different time periods, right? But she was able to juxtapose and kind of pull different story ideas from different parts and kind of mash them together to kind of jump back and forth to have that, when you do a flashback, which I don't think in the book, I'm sorry to say I haven't read the book, but I don't think there's a flashback structure to the book. I think it's more just straightforward. Maybe I'm getting that wrong, but just the way Gerwig was able to kind of jump back and forth between those and have like a different, like this is what it says during that time, but this is what it means now, that kind of thing. I really enjoyed that. And you know, it's got a built-in appeal as well. It's just there's something about that story and about the, you know, the sisters banding together or finding themselves that is very appealing. So really any Little Women, it has that. Like, I think like we talked about with Hoosiers, like a sports movie, Little Women, it's got that built-in story appeal. So what's your second choice?
Okay, well, again, this was a movie I watched while she was at work, and I watched all of her movies during that time period. But this is one that I hadn't seen. You know, I'd heard about it. I knew that Angelina Jolie won an Academy Award for it, and that's Girl Interrupted. And I enjoyed it. Like there's a lot about the movie that I really enjoy. I think she has a great performance. And Winona Ryder, I've always liked her as an actress, and so it was fun to see those two together, and it was a fun little movie.
Okay. Did it carry any particular meaning for you other than it was just fun to watch or good to watch?
It was darker. It had that edge to it, so I like that aspect about it.
Okay, them kind of finding themselves, right? Yeah, I'm sorry to say I know I've seen it. I don't particularly remember the movie that much, other than I don't have any negative feelings towards it, and I know that Jolie did a really good job. Everybody did a good job in there. So my second choice, even though it was directed by a man, again, we're talking about girl movies. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It's just movies that aren't geared towards the dude. You know, it's not like guys in capes or car chases or things like that. Even though Thelma and Louise, which is my second choice, it does have a lot of that stuff in there. It does let Susan Sarandon and Gina Davis kind of be badasses, you know, and they're fighting back against an establishment and against like people, you know, people's perspectives or viewpoints against them as women. And, you know, it has the whole rape angle, obviously, and there's an anger to the movie that I think works even today. And I like the idea of Ridley Scott, speaking to directors who dip their toes into every single genre, like just him being able to make a woman's picture, again, with the Callie Curry script and everything like that, and geared towards that base. I think they all worked together and made something iconic and personal. And you do buy into that anger so you are able to see, yeah, why do they have it unfairly? And they should fight back, and, you know, truck drivers treating them poorly, and, you know, all that stuff. Women shouldn't have to go through those things. It should all be equal. And I like that the movie did that. Have you seen Thelma and Louise in a bit?
Not for a while, but I just like seeing Brad Pitt in the cowboy hat.
Yeah, one of his first movies. He's obviously a hunk of a man in that one. Okay, so what's your third choice?
Okay, the third choice isn't, you know, a girl movie, but it's a movie, again, that my wife owned that I'd never heard of or seen. And so I watched it while she was away at work. And this is stars Hayden Christensen, and it's called Shattered Glass. It's about a writer at a political magazine. And he makes up these stories, and he wins all these awards and gets these, you know, and he lies about the stories that he tells. And so it's a really interesting movie, and it's really well acted and well written. But yeah, it's not really about women and whatever, but it's something that she really enjoyed, and I knew she really liked it, and so I wanted to watch it and see why she liked it. And so Shattered Glass.
Okay, that's the Stephen Glass biopic, and it's Hayden Christensen showing that he can actually act outside of Star Wars.
You know, he's great in this movie. So if you think he's a bad actor, watch Shattered Glass, or even like Life as a House. He's great in that movie too.
Yeah, I think it's all about how you're being directed. You know, it's people pull different things out of you, and I don't think Lucas maybe gave him the chance or the opportunity to show what he was good at.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a whole different topic. But like you talked about, like you know, going through and kind of learning the things that your wife likes, you know, kind of understanding where she's coming from, so you can have that shared viewpoint. I think that's important to do instead of
when she was out making the money and I was sitting home watching movies.
doing what you knew. Right. And so the third one that I wanted to mention, and we mentioned it when Kevin the Critic was on, you know, everything comes back to superheroes. Obviously, I really dug Birds of Prey. Not because, again, I can't sit here and I can't tell you what's empowering for a female. Like, I can't watch Wild Hearts Have Be Broken and say, oh, this is what girls really must. They want to be able to ride horses and feel. I don't know. I can't describe that. I'm not going to enforce my idealisms ideologies on other people. So I can't say what is empowering versus what isn't. So I can only approach movies. If you're going to make a movie that isn't geared specifically towards me, then I try to approach it. Okay, let me learn from this. Let me figure out what's being said so that I can appreciate it. And what I like about Birds of Prey is that it has obviously the female perspective of a comic book movie, which you don't usually get. And it's the women, and it kind of forces that a little bit about how they're all beaten down by men, and it's a man's world. They obviously sing that song in the movie, but I love the idea that it's about these women trying to find their identity. Like Harley Quinn is trying to find an identity outside a relationship with Joker. The Black Canary is trying to find her identity of, outside her mother. Or Renee Montoya is trying to find her identity within the police force. Or I love the Huntress, Mary Elizabeth Winstead's character, how she literally is in front of a mirror practicing her name. Like, they call me Huntress. It's just fascinating watching it through this lens of every character is trying to find their identity, and they find it with each other, and they have a bond because they're all, even though they're after different things, they're after the same thing. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I just really like that angle of the movie. And it's not the best comic book movie ever made. There's still some little bugs kind of scurrying around in there that kind of keep it from greatness, but as making a statement, I just think it works. It worked on me from that perspective. So Birds of Prey, I like that one a lot. So, movies aren't for everybody. Superhero movies aren't going to be for everybody. Horror movies aren't going to be for everybody. It's just a question of walking in and trying to find that commonality, like we talked about with Lauren. So I think that's important, to be able to see each other and appreciate each other more. So obviously, you're, like we talked about before, we mentioned many times, you just made the cross-country move to Texas. And so we want to, you were talking about, you wanted to maybe take a little bit of a break and kind of settle into where you are. And that's understandable. We've been go since I started this whole guest thing. And, since we started up the podcast again, especially on YouTube. So we'll take maybe a little bit of a breather in between. But as far as the movie that we'll do next, you said you had a guest in mind for next time.
Yeah, my wife's cousin reached out. He's a fan of the podcast, and he has a movie he wants to talk about. So he reached out to us. His name is Judd. So we're going to have him on, and he wants to talk about The Explorers. From
1985, the one about the kids that launched themselves into space, right? Yep. Ethan Hawke, I think, was the star of that one. And we talked about River Phoenix before with Stand By Me, so that'll be fun to talk about again. That is a movie that I have watched recently, that I caught up with recently, and so it's kind of fresh in my mind. So that's a good choice. Okay. But again, we don't know how much of a breather we're going to take. Maybe when did you say is the best time to think?
Mid-end July when we get back into it, because it might take a while to get
settled.
My bearings here in Texas.
Right. Okay. And that's, like I said, that's understandable. We want to be able to do that. So again, we'll take a little bit of a breather. We'll let everybody know when we're coming back. Obviously, there's still episodes that people probably haven't listened to that you can catch up with in the meantime.
Yeah.
But we obviously don't want to take as big of a break as we took last time.
Come on.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. I think you'll settle in before 3.5 years, right?
I was more than settled last time.
Yeah. Okay. So we're good. All right. So yeah, next time we'll talk Explorers, 1985. But until then, again, I've been Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Jonny Craddock.
And we'll catch you on the flip side, guys.